Dr. Elias Ward sat inside the shuttle, staring through the small window as the planet below came into view. From space, it looked green and silver, covered with thick forests and shining rivers. The locals called it Tariq, home of the Cherokee. It was humid, hot, and untamed. To him, it was the location of his new assignment, 6 months of living inside the nesting grounds of the Cherokee to observe how their society cared for its young. The shuttle's pilot glanced at him. "You sure about this, Doctor?" the man asked. Elias gave a short smile. "It's just research. I'll be fine." Still, his hands were tight around the straps of his pack. He had studied alien biology for years, but this was his first time, living directly with a species known for their strict traditions and clan loyalty. Reports describe them as reptilian in form, tall and strong, covered in scales that shimmered in sunlight. The idea of being surrounded by them day and night carried a weight that textbooks never prepared him for. The shuttle lowered through clouds. Heat blurred the view outside. Soon, dense jungle filled his vision. Giant trees, wide leaves, and the sound of countless creatures echoing even through the hull. They landed on a clearing marked with carved stones. Waiting there were 6 Cherokee warriors, their scales painted with clay patterns. At their front stood Kareth. She was tall, her scales a deep green with hints of bronze along the edges. Her shoulders carried a cloak of woven fibers, marking her as a nest guardian. The moment Elias stepped down from the shuttle, Kareth's eyes fixed on him. They were narrow, golden, and unreadable. "You are the human," she said in a voice that was low and firm. Elias adjusted his pack. "Yes, Dr. Elias Ward, xenobiologist. Thank you for allowing me to study your nesting traditions." Kareth tilted her head. To her people, words of thanks carried weight. They were not casual. They were promises. She narrowed her eyes slightly but did not argue. Instead, she motioned for him to follow. Arrival at the nest. The walk was long and heavy with heat. Elias felt sweat dripping down his back while the Cherokee moved with steady, graceful steps. He tried to keep up, writing small notes in his field tablet as he walked. The jungle was alive with colors, blue flowers the size of his head, insects glowing faintly, vines hanging low. After 2 hours, the group reached the nesting grounds. Elias stopped, stunned by the sight. It was not one nest, but dozens, built into the earth like domes of woven reeds and hardened clay. They were arranged in a circle around a central pit where fires burned gently, sending smoke high into the air. Hatchlings, small, scaled, and curious, peeked out of the nests. Adult guardians moved about with careful precision, feeding, cleaning, and training the young. "This," Kareth said, pointing at the circle, "is where you will live. My nest will shelter you." Elias blinked. He had expected a separate hut or a guest house, but Kareth was already leading him toward one of the larger nests at the edge of the circle. Her nest was built half underground, its walls lined with soft moss. Inside, warm air pressed around him. He noticed small carved stones along the walls, each marked with a different pattern. "You will stay here," she said. "Do not leave the nest at night. Do not disturb the young, and do not refuse food when it is offered." Elias nodded quickly, typing down her rules. Of course, observation only. Kareth stared at him, her head slightly tilted. The human's behavior was strange, polite, careful, and hesitant. Yet he had entered her nest without question. Among the Cherokee, such an act held meaning. Few were ever welcomed into a nest, and those who were became part of its bond. To Kareth, this human had just taken the first step of ritual acceptance. First misunderstanding. That evening, Kareth brought a bowl of cooked roots and strips of meat. Elias had already set up his equipment, a small recorder, and a notebook. When she placed the food before him, he smiled politely. "Thank you, Guardian Kareth," he said. "This is generous." She frowned. "You accept it?" "Yes, of course." Elias picked up a strip and chewed, finding the taste sharp but edible. Kareth studied him in silence. To her people, sharing the first meal inside a nest was a powerful gesture. By accepting food given directly from her hand, Elias had symbolically chosen her. She lowered her eyes briefly, the Cherokee sign of acknowledgement, though Elias had no idea what he had just done. Later that night, as he tried to sleep on the soft moss bed she provided, Elias noted in his recorder, Day 1. Arrival successful. Assigned to Guardian Kareth's nest. Locals appear cautious but willing to accept me. Atmosphere extremely humid. Nesting circle active. Communal care seems structured. Guardian shows signs of respect. Possible high trust. Already. He turned off the recorder, completely unaware that Kareth was awake across the nest, watching him with the quiet certainty that this strange human had chosen her nest above all others. The nesting life. The following days passed with Elias adjusting to the strange routines. At dawn, the Cherokee gathered around the central pit to chant low songs that resonated through the ground. Elias recorded the sound, fascinated by the way hatchlings swayed in rhythm. Kareth explained little, only observing whether Elias could keep up with the pace of life. She often brought him food before serving the hatchlings. Elias took it as a mark of kindness. In truth, it was a deeply personal offering, one usually reserved for bondmates. The other guardians whispered to each other when they saw it, their golden eyes glancing between Kareth and the human. Elias noticed the whispers, but assumed it was simple curiosity about him. After all, no human had ever lived so close to the nests before. He kept his focus on research. He studied the hatchlings, noting how they learned to climb before they could walk, how they snapped their small jaws when impatient, and how guardians corrected them with low hisses instead of physical punishment. He admired the efficiency, the quiet care, and the strange beauty of it all. But each night when he returned to Kareth's nest, she always had food waiting. She always placed his portion first, even before her own. And each night she watched him carefully as he accepted it. To Elias, this was routine. To Kareth, it was confirmation. The bond was growing. A subtle shift on the 7th night as heavy rain poured outside. Elias sat inside the nest writing his notes. Kareth sat opposite him, sharpening a bone blade. "You watch much," she said suddenly. "That's my job," Elias replied with a smile. "Observation." She tilted her head. "And you approve?" "Of course. Your people care for the hatchlings with great discipline. It's impressive." Kareth gave a slow nod. Among her kind, approval spoken so directly carried weight. Her chest rose with quiet pride. In her mind, his words were not just about the hatchlings. They were about her as guardian, as chosen partner. Elias, tired but satisfied with his notes, never noticed the deeper meaning. He simply thought she was pleased someone appreciated the hard work. Closing of Part 1A as the days stretched on, Elias settled into the rhythm of the nest. He grew accustomed to the humid nights, the buzzing insects, and the constant watchful eyes of the hatchlings. Yet he remained unaware that his every action, his thanks, his acceptance of food, his presence in Kareth's nest, was building a story in the minds of the Cherokee. For them, this human was not just an observer. He was part of a ritual he did not understand, one that tied him to Kareth's nest in ways his research manuals had never described. And so, while Elias wrote in his logs about science and behavior, Kareth sat across from him in the dim firelight, quietly convinced that the human had already chosen her. The misunderstanding had begun, silent but powerful, and neither of them yet knew where it would lead. The morning began with the sound of drums. Elias opened his eyes to the steady rhythm that shook the ground. It was not music in the human sense. It was a call. The Cherokee used hollowed trunks to send messages through the jungle. Each beat carried a meaning: danger, gathering, ceremony, or instruction. This morning the drums called the guardians to assemble at the central fire. Elias rubbed his tired eyes. Nights in the nest were warm, and though the moss bed softened the ground, the heavy air often made sleep uneasy. Kareth was already awake, standing near the entrance of the nest with her cloak over her shoulders. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "You will come," she said. It was not a question. Elias pulled on his field vest and carried his tablet. He followed her out into the circle, where dozens of guardians stood in neat rows. Hatchlings crowded near the edges, curious but quiet. The elder of the circle, his scales pale with age, lifted his arms. "Another season begins," the elder announced in his low, vibrating voice. "The nests must be strong. The young must be guarded. All who share food within the nests share duty." Elias typed quickly, recording the speech. But as he glanced up, he noticed several guardians' eyes shifting toward him. Their whispers followed. Low hisses, quick words in the Cherokee tongue. He could not understand, but he felt the weight of it. Kareth, however, stood proudly at his side, as though his presence confirmed something unspoken. Shared meals that afternoon. Kareth brought Elias a plate of roasted fruits and smoked fish. She set it down in front of him before the hatchlings, received theirs. Elias smiled politely and began to eat. "Your food always keeps me alive," he said with a small laugh. Kareth tilted her head. "You accept what I bring?" Of course, it would be rude not to. To Elias it was a simple habit, never refuse food from a host. But to Kareth, his words were deeper. Accepting food again and again was a sign of recognition. By saying, it would be rude to refuse, he was, without knowing, saying he valued her above others. Nearby, two female guardians exchanged glances. One whispered, "He eats before the hatchlings again. Does he not know what this means?" The other replied, "Perhaps he knows, perhaps he chooses her." Their eyes lingered on Elias, who was too busy chewing to notice. A walk through the nesting grounds later in the day, Kareth guided Elias through the outer edge of the nesting circle. Vines hung low, and insects buzzed in the thick air. She moved easily, while Elias stumbled, brushing sweat from his forehead. "You struggle with the air," Kareth observed. "It's heavier than what I'm used to," Elias admitted. "But I'll adapt. Humans are good at adapting." Her golden eyes narrowed slightly. To her, those words carried another meaning. Adaptation was a quality sought in mates, someone strong enough to change and endure. She gave a small nod. They passed by a group of hatchlings climbing up a tree trunk. Elias paused, fascinated. "They learn balance before speech," he noted into his recorder. Remarkable coordination at such an early stage. One hatchling slipped and nearly fell, but Kareth caught it with a swift movement. Elias reached out instinctively, steadying the small creature with his hands. The hatchling squeaked, then stared up at him with wide, curious eyes. Kareth watched this closely. "The young accept your touch," she said. "They know you're sent now." Elias laughed lightly. "Guess I smell harmless." But to Kareth it was no laughing matter. For a human to hold a hatchling, and for the hatchling to respond without fear, was considered a strong omen of acceptance into the nest. She saw his action not as a scientist's curiosity, but as a guardian's duty. The bow. That evening, after recording his notes, Elias prepared to rest. He noticed Kareth sharpening her bone blade again. It was a nightly ritual, her way of preparing for the next day. "Good night, Guardian," Elias said politely. He gave a small bow, a gesture of respect from his own culture. Kareth froze. Among her people, lowering the head before another was a symbol of submission and trust, a gesture reserved only for bonded partners. Her hand tightened on the blade. She looked at him carefully. "You lower your head to me," she said. Elias straightened, confused. "It's just respect." "Respect," she repeated slowly, as though tasting the word. "Yes, respect." But inside, she was convinced. This human had performed one of the final gestures of acceptance. To her, there was no question now. Elias was more than a guest. The trial of patience. The next day, Kareth brought Elias to watch a training session for the hatchlings. They were placed in a circle with a pile of stones. The task was simple. Build a tower using the stones without letting it fall. Each hatchling grew frustrated quickly, hissing when the tower collapsed. Elias crouched down beside them. "Steady hands," he murmured. He picked up a stone and placed it gently, showing them patience. Slowly the hatchlings copied him, calming under his example. The tower rose higher than before. Kareth watched in silence. She had seen many guardians try to teach patience, but few succeeded. This human, with no claws or fangs, had managed it with calm words and steady gestures. When the tower finally fell, the hatchlings hissed in protest. Elias laughed softly. "It's all right. Try again tomorrow. That's how learning works." The hatchlings tilted their heads, echoing his words with small growls. Kareth's chest swelled with pride. To her, he had shown not only care but the ability to guide. These were qualities only a chosen partner was expected to display. Whispers in the night. That night, as the nests settled into quiet, Elias lay back on the moss, writing in his recorder. Day 15. Progress steady. Hatchlings respond well to observation. Guardian Kareth continues to show unusual generosity. Other guardians observe me often, but no hostility so far. Possible cultural significance of shared meals. Need further study. He turned off the recorder and sighed. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth. Across the nest, Kareth sat watching him as always. Outside, 2 guardians whispered near the fire. "The human stays in her nest every night. He eats her food. He bows his head. The signs are clear. Then he is chosen. She should prepare the proving." The words carried through the night, though Elias did not hear them. Kareth, however, did. Her golden eyes shone in the firelight as she listened. Elias's perspective. For Elias, the weeks were a test of endurance. The heat pressed on him daily. Insects bit at his skin, and the heavy rains often soaked his notes. But he found the work thrilling. Every day brought a new discovery. The hatchlings' learning patterns, the guardians' discipline, the structure of their society. He admired Kareth for her strength. She never complained, never faltered. She could silence a group of hatchlings with a single hiss. Yet she also cared for them with quiet gentleness. Elias respected her deeply, but he thought of her only as a guardian and guide. What he never realized was that every smile, every word of thanks, every bow of his head was being written into an entirely different story. One he was not aware of. Kareth's perspective. To Kareth, the human was unlike any she had ever known. He was fragile in body yet strong in will. He did not fear the hatchlings' bites or the heavy storms. He observed, but he also acted, steadying, teaching, guiding. His actions fit the marks of a chosen bondmate, even if his words seemed strange. Each night, when he slept peacefully, inside her nest, Kareth felt a growing certainty. The human had come not just to observe, but to join. His every gesture was proof. She began to imagine the coming trial, the proving ritual, where he would show his strength before the nest. She would stand at his side. Closing of Part 2A. As the rain fell again that night, Elias slept with his recorder beside him, thinking only of his work. Kareth, however, sat awake in silence. Outside, the whispers of the other guardians continued, spreading through the circle. The human had chosen, they said. The human had bowed his head, eaten the food, touched the young. The human belonged. Elias did not know it yet, but his research was leading him into something far greater than science. He was walking, step by step, into a ritual of bonding he had never agreed to, and Kareth was ready to claim what she believed was already hers. The drums began at dawn. Their deep sound rolled through the nesting grounds, shaking the earth beneath Elias's feet. He was sitting outside Kareth's nest, writing notes, when the guardians began to gather. Hatchlings peeked from their shelters, hissing in excitement. Something was happening, something unusual. Kareth stepped out of the nest, her cloak heavy on her shoulders, her bone blade tied to her waist. She looked taller than usual, her scales gleaming in the sunlight. She turned to Elias. "It is time," she said. Elias blinked. "Time for what?" "The proving," Kareth answered. "You will stand." He frowned, confused. "Proving? Do you mean a ceremony?" Kareth did not explain further. She simply motioned for him to follow. The gathering, at the center of the circle, the elder stood beside a stone platform. Guardians from every nest surrounded it, forming a wide ring. Hatchlings climbed onto their parents' shoulders to see better. The drums stopped and silence fell. The elder's voice carried across the gathering. "Today we witness the human who has chosen. Today he will prove his strength, his patience, and his heart. If he endures, he is accepted. If he fails, he leaves." A cheer of hisses and growls rose from the crowd. Elias froze. He turned to Kareth. "Wait, what is this? I didn't agree to any—" But Kareth's eyes were firm. "You have already chosen. You accepted my food. You bowed. You touched the young. The nest sees it. You must prove yourself now." Elias's heart raced. He wanted to protest, but dozens of golden eyes were fixed on him. He realized quickly that backing out might be seen as an insult, maybe even a betrayal. Slowly, he tightened the straps of his vest. "All right," he whispered to himself. "If it's a test, I'll try. First trial, endurance." The elder raised his hand. "First, endurance. The one who stands must last against the heat and burden." Two guardians brought forward a heavy stone disc tied with ropes. Elias stared at it. It looked like a weightlifting test. Kareth leaned close. "You must carry it around the circle. Do not drop it." Elias sighed. "Great. A fitness test." The stone was heavier than he expected. He lifted it awkwardly, balancing the ropes across his shoulders. The crowd hissed approval. Then he began to walk. The heat of the sun pressed on him. The jungle air was thick and sweat poured down his face. His legs burned as he stumbled forward step after step. The guardians watched in silence, only the occasional hiss breaking the stillness. Halfway around the circle, Elias's knees nearly buckled. He gritted his teeth. "Don't fail now," he thought. "If I collapse, they'll never respect me." He adjusted the ropes, leaned forward, and kept moving. His breath came in sharp gasps, but he forced his body to keep walking. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached the elder again and dropped the stone with a loud thud. The crowd hissed in approval, some even tapping their claws against the ground. Kareth stepped closer, pride shining in her eyes. "You endure," she said, softly. Elias just nodded, too tired to reply. "Second trial, protection." The elder raised his hand again. "Second, protection. The one who stands must guard the young from threat." At his signal, several older hatchlings ran into the circle carrying sticks. They were painted with red clay to look like predators. They hissed and charged toward Niu, a group of younger hatchlings placed in the center. Elias blinked. "Wait, they want me to protect them," Kareth said firmly. Elias dropped his pack and ran forward. The older hatchlings swung their sticks wildly. He had no weapons, only his bare hands. When one swung at a younger hatchling, Elias stepped in front, blocking the strike with his arm. The stick stung, but he stayed firm. "Back off," he shouted, waving his arms. He grabbed a long branch from the ground and used it like a staff, spinning it clumsily but effectively. He knocked the sticks out of two attackers' hands. The younger hatchlings squealed and clung to him, their small claws gripping his vest. The mock battle raged for minutes. Elias moved quickly, blocking strikes, using his staff to push the older hatchlings away. His legs ached, his arms shook, but he refused to let any of the smaller ones be touched. Finally, the elder raised his hand. The predators stopped, bowing their heads in respect. The younger hatchlings hissed happily, climbing up Elias's arms and shoulders. The crowd roared with approval. Kareth's golden eyes glowed with pride. "You protect as if they were your own," she said. Elias, breathing hard, laughed weakly. "They didn't give me much of a choice, but inside he felt something stir. For a brief moment, he had forgotten the trial. He had simply wanted to keep the hatchlings safe. Third trial, resourcefulness. The elder spoke again. Third, resourcefulness. The one who stands must use the world to survive. Elias was led to the edge of the jungle. The rules were simple. He would be given nothing but a knife, and he had to return before sunset with food and proof of shelter. Kareth pressed the knife into his hand. Her clawed fingers lingered on his skin. "Show them who you are," she whispered. Elias swallowed, hard. "No pressure, huh?" He entered the jungle alone. The heat was suffocating, and the sounds of distant creatures filled the air. He moved carefully, searching for anything useful. First, he found broad leaves. He wove them together into a crude shelter under a tree, just enough to show he could protect himself from rain. Then he searched for food. He remembered Kareth's meals, roots, fruits, fish. He spotted a vine with round red fruits. Carefully, he cut one open. It smelled sweet, but unfamiliar. Unsure if it was safe, he decided not to risk it. Instead, he moved toward the river. Using his knife, he sharpened a long stick into a spear. He waited quietly at the edge until a silver fish swam close. With one sharp thrust, he caught it. The water splashed up his arm, but he held the fish firmly. By the time the sun dipped low, Elias returned to the circle with the fish in one hand and a bundle of leaves in the other. The crowd hissed in excitement. The elder inspected the items and gave a slow nod. The human finds food. The human makes shelter. The human lives. Cheers rose from the crowd. Kareth's eyes softened as she stepped closer. "You have proven all," she said. "Endurance, protection, resourcefulness. You are worthy." Elias's confusion. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead, still catching his breath. "Worthy? Worthy of what?" The elder's golden eyes fixed on him. "Worthy of the bond." The crowd hissed approval again. Kareth stood beside Elias proudly, as though everything had already been decided. Elias blinked in shock. "Wait, bond? No. I think you're misunderstanding. I came here as a researcher, not—" But his words were drowned out by the loud hisses and growls of celebration. The guardians began to chant, and the hatchlings danced around the circle. Kareth placed her hand on his shoulder, steady and firm. "You cannot step back now. The nest has seen you. You belong." Elias's stomach tightened. He looked around at the cheering crowd, then at Kareth's glowing eyes. Somehow, without even realizing, he had passed a series of trials that were never meant to be for a guest. To him, they were tests of strength and survival. To the Cherokee, they were the marks of a chosen partner. Closing of Part 3 that night, the celebration filled the circle. Fires burned high, and food was shared freely. Elias sat in silence, overwhelmed, as guardians came to touch his shoulders in respect. Hatchlings climbed into his lap as if he were already one of them. Kareth sat proudly beside him, her golden eyes never leaving his face. She believed the bond was sealed. The human had proven himself. He had endured, protected, and survived. He was hers. Elias, however, stared into the flames with a heavy heart. He realized now that his presence in the nest had never been seen as simple observation. Every polite gesture, every action, every choice had been taken as something far greater. He had walked into a ritual without knowing it, and now he was trapped in the role of a chosen mate. And the worst part was, he did not yet know how to escape it without breaking the fragile trust he had worked so hard to build. The night after the proving trial was filled with noise. The fires burned high, and the Cherokee guardians sang low songs that echoed through the jungle. Hatchlings played in the dirt, chasing one another in dizzy circles. Food was passed around, freely, roasted roots and spiced meat filling the air with heavy scent. Elias sat near the fire, surrounded by eyes. Every guardian that walked past touched his shoulder or bowed their head slightly. The hatchlings clung to his arms, chirping happily. He tried to smile, but his chest felt tight. Kareth sat beside him, proud and still, her golden eyes shining. She said little, but her presence was heavy, as though she had already claimed him. To her, the trial was complete. The bond was sealed. Elias looked at her carefully. She thinks this means something I don't understand, he realized. I've walked into a ritual I never agreed to. The elder's words. When the songs quieted, the elder rose. His pale scales shimmered in the firelight. He lifted his arms and spoke so all could hear. The human has endured the burden. He has guarded the young. He has taken from the world and returned with life. These are the marks of a bond. He belongs now to the nest and to the guardian who brought him within it. The crowd hissed and tapped the ground in rhythm, a sound of approval. Elias froze. His heart pounded. He turned quickly to Kareth. Wait, what is he saying? Elias whispered. Kareth's voice was calm, certain. He says you are mine. You proved yourself. You are bonded to my nest now. Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him. Bonded? No, that's not. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought these were just cultural tests, not. But Kareth tilted her head, confusion flashing in her eyes. You accepted. You stood before all. You cannot say you did not know. To step into the trial is to choose. Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to explain that in human culture, trials and ceremonies could be observed without meaning personal commitment. But here, every action carried weight he had not understood. The confrontation later that night, back in Kareth's nest, silence hung heavy between them. Elias sat on the moss bed, his hands gripping his recorder. Kareth stood near the entrance, her back to him. Finally, Elias spoke. Kareth, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Where I come from, sharing food, bowing, even helping the young, those things don't mean what they mean to you. Kareth turned slowly, her golden eyes burning. You say they mean nothing? No, Elias said quickly. They mean respect, kindness, duty, but not this bond you speak of. I didn't know. Her jaw tightened. For the first time since he had met her, her voice carried hurt. So all your actions were empty? When you ate the food I gave, it was nothing? When you bowed your head, it was nothing? Elias shook his head. It wasn't nothing. It was respect. But not the promise you thought it was. Kareth's shoulders stiffened. She looked away, her claws digging into the wooden frame of the nest. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice low and sharp, she whispered, You have shamed me before the nest. The words cut deeper than any blade. Elias opened, his mouth to reply, but no words came. The sudden alarm, before the silence could stretch longer, the drums began again. But this time they were not slow or steady. They were sharp, fast, urgent. The sound rattled through the ground like thunder. Kareth's head snapped up. Her golden eyes narrowed. Raiders! Elias stood quickly. Raiders! What raiders? She grabbed her cloak and blade. Outsiders. They come for the hatchlings. The entire nesting circle erupted in motion. Guardians rushed to the center, forming defensive lines. Hatchlings squealed as they were herded into the inner nests. The drums pounded faster, echoing through the jungle. Elias's heart raced. He had heard rumors of rival species, scavengers who raided other colonies for food or resources, but he had never thought they would come here now. Kareth looked at him sharply. Stay in the nest, do not interfere. But Elias shook his head. I can't just sit here if they attack. She hissed softly, frustration in her eyes, but she did not stop him. The attack shadows moved at the edge of the jungle. Figures emerged, tall and lean, their bodies covered in dull gray scales. Their eyes glowed faint red in the firelight. They carried jagged weapons made of bone and metal. The Cherokee guardians hissed loudly, forming a circle around the young. The raiders answered with shrill cries and charged. The clash was violent. Bone blades struck against each other, sparks flying. Guardians pushed back raiders with strength and discipline. Hatchlings cried inside the nests, their voices piercing. Elias stood frozen for a moment, then forced himself to move. He grabbed a fallen branch, heavy and solid. He had no claws, no scales, but he had his body and his mind. A raider broke through the line and rushed toward a nest filled with hatchlings. Elias ran forward, swinging the branch with all his strength. It cracked against the raider's side, knocking him off balance. The hatchlings squealed, and Elias stood between them and the attacker, his heart pounding. The raider snarled and lunged again. Elias ducked, shoved the branch forward, and tripped the creature onto the ground. He grabbed a stone and hurled it at another raider approaching from the side. It struck the alien's jaw with a dull thud. The hatchlings pressed close to Elias's, legs chirping in fear. He raised the branch again, ready to fight. Fighting side by side, Kareth appeared at his side, her blade flashing. She cut down one raider with swift precision and hissed at Elias, "Stay low. Do not let them near the young." Together they fought, Kareth with the speed of a trained guardian, Elias with the desperation and creativity of a human. He used whatever he could find, branches, stones, even a broken piece of clay pot. Where Kareth struck with precision, Elias struck with improvisation. One raider grabbed his arm, claws digging into his skin. Elias twisted suddenly, driving his knee into the creature's stomach, then smashed the branch across its head. It fell with a hiss. Kareth glanced at him briefly. For the first time that day, there was no anger in her eyes, only recognition. The turning point. The battle raged on, but the Guardians held their ground. The raiders, surprised by the fierce resistance, began to retreat. One last attacker tried to dash toward the nests, but Elias stepped in front of him, gripping his branch like a spear. The raider snarled, lunging forward. Elias braced himself, holding the branch steady. The raider impaled himself on the sharpened end, collapsing to the ground with a hiss of pain. Silence followed. The drum slowed, then stopped. The raiders were gone. The nesting circle stood victorious, though bruised and bloodied. Aftermath. Elias dropped the branch, his arms shaking. Sweat poured down his face and his chest heaved. The hatchlings clung to him, chirping in relief. Kareth stepped closer, her blade lowered. She looked at him with unreadable eyes. Finally, she said softly, "You fought for them. Not for ritual, not for trial. For them." Elias nodded, still catching his breath. "I couldn't let them be taken. I didn't think. I just acted." The elder approached, his pale scales shimmering. He looked at Elias, long and slow. "You did not stand for ritual. You stood for life. That is greater." The guardians around them hissed in agreement. Kareth's realization later, as the fires burned low and the wounded were tended, Kareth and Elias sat together outside her nest. The silence between them was different now, softer. Kareth's voice was low. "Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I read meaning where there was none." Elias looked at her carefully. "You weren't wrong about me wanting to help. I care about the hatchlings, I care about this place, but not in the way your people think. I never meant to trick you." She nodded slowly. "You are not of my people. You cannot see as we do. But tonight, I saw you fight. You are not empty." Elias gave a tired smile. "And I saw you fight. You're stronger than I'll ever be." For the first time since the misunderstanding began, Kareth's eyes softened. She no longer looked at him with possession, but with respect. Closing of Part 4, the nesting circle slowly returned to calm, though the memory of the raid would remain. The hatchlings slept safely, their small breaths filling the nests. The guardians kept silent watch, their weapons ready. Elias sat in the quiet, his body aching but his spirit strangely lighter. He had not proven himself through ritual or trial this time. He had proven himself through action, through the simple human choice, to protect life at any cost. Kareth sat beside him, silent but steady. The bond between them had shifted. No longer a misunderstanding of rituals, but something new, an alliance forged in fire and danger. Neither of them knew what the future would bring, but both understood one truth. Sometimes bonds were not chosen by tradition, but by survival. And tonight, They had survived together. Elias stood at the edge of the nest wall, his breath heavy, his clothes torn and stained with dirt and alien blood. The smoke from the small fires still curled in the air where the raiders had attacked only hours ago. The Cherokee hatchlings were safe, huddled deep in the chambers below, and Kareth stood beside him, her scales scratched but her stance proud. Silence fell after the chaos. The alien sky was turning a soft purple as the twin suns lowered on the horizon. Elias knew this would be his last evening inside the nest. His assignment had run far beyond anything a simple observation mission was supposed to be. He had come to watch. Instead, he had fought. He had become part of them, even when he did not mean to. Kareth's reflection. Kareth kept her gaze on Elias. In her heart, she felt a mix of pride and confusion. The human had fought like no outsider ever had. When the raiders had come, large, insect-like creatures with chittering voices and sharp limbs, Elias had not run. He had not hidden. He had grabbed whatever he could find and stood in front of the hatchlings. She remembered the moment clearly. Elias swinging a broken piece of nest wall like a club, shouting to draw the raiders away, his movements wild and unpredictable. Cherokee warriors fought with order and form, but Elias fought with chaos and determination. His clever traps, small pits, weighted rocks, and lures made from his own jacket had turned the tide. It was not the way of her people, but it worked. And for that, Kareth could not see him as a mere guest anymore. Yet she also remembered the sting of his words earlier that day, when the elder had announced their bond. Elias had stepped back, shaken his head, and explained in his clumsy way that he was not here to be her mate, that he had come only to study. The humiliation had burned. But after the battle, the humiliation had turned into something else. Understanding. Perhaps Elias's bond was not one of nest or mating, but of loyalty, of choice. Elias's thoughts. Elias leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the glowing horizon. He felt both relief and guilt. Relief that the hatchlings were alive. Relief that Kareth had survived. But guilt, too, for the misunderstanding that had caused so much tension. He had not meant to deceive anyone. When he first entered Kareth's nest, he thought it was only about science. Note the temperatures, record the feeding cycles, study how the Cherokee raised their young. He had written pages upon pages of careful notes, but now, after weeks of living with them, fighting with them, laughing in small moments, sharing food and shelter, his notes seemed hollow compared to what he felt. These were not just subjects for study. These were people, real, complex, proud people. And Kareth was more than just his guide. She was a friend, perhaps even more than that, though he could not define it in human terms. He turned to her slowly. "Kareth," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to explain again. I am not here as a mate. I never meant to mislead you, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I will always stand with your nest. You have my loyalty, if not the bond you expected." The elder's decision. The Cherokee elder, a scaled figure with silver patterns across her head, approached. Her staff tapped against the stone floor as she spoke. "You have fought for the nest as one of us, human Elias," the elder said. "You proved yourself not only with words but with action. No Cherokee can deny that you protected our young when danger came. For this you are part of the story of our nest." Kareth lowered her head respectfully, but her eyes flicked toward Elias. The elder's words were final. In Cherokee culture, once the elder declared someone part of the nest story, they could not be erased. It was a bond of history, if not of blood. Elias gave a small bow. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "But I must return to my people soon. My mission is complete. They will come for me in a few days." The elder nodded slowly. "Then take this bond with you across the stars. Tell your people the Cherokee are not only warriors of the nest but also friends of humankind." Kareth and Elias later, as the night grew darker, Elias and Kareth sat on the high ledge overlooking the valley. The nest below was alive with the soft hisses and chirps of the hatchlings. Kareth broke the silence. When you first came, I thought your every act was ritual. I believed your bow, your thanks, your sharing of food. All of it was a way of asking for me as your mate. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. I didn't know your customs. On my world, those things mean something very different. Kareth's sharp teeth showed in a small, amused smile. I know that now. At first I felt shame when you said it was not your intent, but then you fought beside me. I realized a truth. Perhaps your kind bonds in ways we do not understand. Perhaps loyalty is your ritual. Elias looked at her, surprised. Maybe you're right. For us, loyalty is everything. To stand with someone even when you don't have to, that is one of the highest bonds. Kareth tilted her head, her eyes glowing faintly in the alien night. Then perhaps we are bonded after all. Not as nestmates, not as mates, but as something new. Elias smiled at that. Something new, he agreed. The departure. 3 days later, a human shuttle descended from the sky, its bright engines casting long shadows across the valley. The Cherokee gathered at the nest entrance, watching the strange craft with a mix of awe and suspicion. Elias stood with his pack, ready to leave. His heart felt heavy. Part of him wanted to return to the safety of human stations, to share his research, to rest in familiar air. But another part of him felt torn away from the nest that had become like a second home. Kareth approached, standing tall despite the sadness in her eyes. Human Elias, she said, using his full name as a sign of respect. Go back to Yi, your people. Tell them of the Cherokee. Tell them we do not fear alliance. Elias nodded, swallowing hard. And you tell your people that humanity is not here to take, but to share. We are not perfect, but we will stand by those who trust us. For a long moment, they looked at each other. Then, without thinking, Elias extended his hand. Human. Style. Kareth looked at it curiously, then placed her scaled palm against his. Different skin, different species, but the gesture needed no translation. The legacy as. The shuttle carried Elias away. He looked out the small window. The nest shrank. Into the distance, a cluster of stone and scale under the twin suns. He thought of Kareth standing proud among her people watching him leave. In his notebook, he wrote the final words of his mission. I was sent only to observe. But in the nest of the Cherokee, I found more than knowledge. I found a new meaning, of bond, not through ritual or misunderstanding, but through choice. Humanity and the Cherokee may never share the same customs, but we share something deeper. Respect. And respect across the stars may be the strongest bond of all.